It is 1989. Brunswick Corporation, the Chicago-based sporting goods conglomerate, finalizes the acquisition of Bayliner Marine for roughly $500 million. At that moment, Bayliner is the largest boat manufacturer in the world, producing more than 50,000 boats annually out of facilities spanning multiple states. The name alone carries weight on every freshwater lake and saltwater marina in North America. The joke used to be that you could not go to a summer weekend on the water without seeing a Bayliner. By the late 2000s, you could not give one away. This is not a story about bad luck. It is a story about what happens when the logic of the builder is replaced, quietly and then completely, by the logic of the buyer. Rewind 32 years. Orrin Edson founded Bayliner Marine in 1955 in Seattle, Washington. He was not a naval architect. He was not an heir to a boating dynasty. He was a salesman. Specifically, a man who understood something about the American middle class that the existing boat industry refused to accept, that ordinary families wanted to be on the water and could not afford the price to get there. The recreational boat market in the mid-1950s was not built for the working family. Boats were expensive, finicky, custom-trimmed affairs that required significant capital just to purchase and significant patience to own. Dealers were selective. Financing was difficult. The entire experience felt designed to filter out anyone who was not already comfortable. Edson looked at that wall and decided to go around it. His first products were simple, practical, and stripped of luxury pretense, small runabouts that a foreman or a shop teacher could actually consider buying. He simplified the transaction, built a dealer network that prioritized volume over exclusivity, and priced aggressively from the start. Where competitors offered options and customization and led with prestige, Edson offered clarity. Here is the boat. Here is the price. Here is how you finance it. The response from the market was not polite interest. Through the late 1950s and into the 1960s, as post-war prosperity pushed disposable income into American households that had never had it before, Bayliner grew steadily. Edson reinvested. He expanded production. He did not move upmarket. He did not pivot toward the premium buyer. He stayed exactly where he had planted himself, in the middle, serving the family that wanted a weekend on the lake without a second mortgage to get there. That discipline would build an empire. It would also, in other hands, become a trap. By the mid-1960s, Bayliner was no longer a regional curiosity. It was a production operation. Edson had built something that the boat industry had not seen before in that form. A manufacturing system oriented around volume, consistency, and price discipline rather than craftsmanship on demand. Where traditional boat builders worked in wood and varnish, with skilled tradespeople shaping each hull by hand, Bayliner moved into fiberglass. The shift was not cosmetic. Fiberglass allowed faster production, lower labor intensity per unit, and a finished product that required less maintenance from the buyer, which mattered enormously to a customer who had never owned a boat before and did not want to learn gel coat repair as a hobby. The operational logic was tight. Standardize the hulls, rationalize the options, run the molds continuously, and push volume through a dealer network that was compensated to move boats, not to cultivate relationships. It was closer to automotive thinking than to traditional marine thinking, and in the 1960s, that gap in philosophy was still wide enough to be a genuine competitive edge. Dealers signed on because the margins worked and the product moved. Customers signed on because for the first time, a decent family runabout was within reach of a household income that previously had no business standing near a boat showroom. Bayliner was not selling aspiration, it was selling access. Through the 1970s, the company expanded its model range, not wildly, but deliberately. Edson added larger boats as his original customers aged into bigger budgets. A buyer who had purchased a 17-foot runabout in 1963 was a candidate for a 22-foot cruiser in 1974. The brand was building a loyalty ladder, and enough people were climbing it that the revenue base widened every year. By the early 1980s, Bayliner had grown into something that defied easy categorization. It was not a luxury brand. It was not a niche manufacturer. It was a mass-market industrial operation producing boats the way Detroit produced cars, at scale, at speed, and at a price point designed to convert the undecided. Then came the performance boats. In the early 1980s, Bayliner introduced the Cobra series, Sportier, more aggressive-looking hulls aimed at buyers who wanted something with velocity in its silhouette, not just its spec sheet. The Cobras sold. They sold because Bayliner had built the distribution to put boats in front of buyers who had never considered them. And the performance styling drew a slightly younger, slightly more aspirational customer into the showroom. At the peak of the model's popularity, Bayliner was producing and selling boats at a rate no American manufacturer had matched. The number that defined this era, more than 50,000 boats per year by the mid to late 1980s. 50,000. In an industry where most manufacturers measured success in hundreds of units annually, Bayliner was moving product at a scale that made competitors look like cottage operations. Orrin Edson had built the largest recreational boat company on Earth. He had done it by refusing to move upmarket, by staying loyal to the buyer everyone else ignored, and by running a manufacturing operation disciplined enough to make the economics work at low price points. It was an extraordinary achievement. It was also, by 1989, Brunswick Corporation had been watching, and Brunswick had a different idea about what Bayliner was for. Brunswick Corporation was not a boat company, it was a portfolio. By 1989, Brunswick owned bowling equipment, billiards tables, fishing tackle, and marine engines under the Mercury brand. It was a conglomerate in the classic late 20th century mold, a holding company that moved through sporting goods categories, acquiring scale, extracting synergies, and managing brands as financial assets rather than operating missions. When it paid roughly $500 million for Bayliner, it was not buying a philosophy. It was buying market share, production capacity, and a dealer network it could run Mercury engines through. On paper, the logic was defensible. Bayliner hulls plus Mercury engines was vertical integration with real margin potential. Brunswick could sell the engine and the boat, control more of the customer transaction, and use Bayliner's distribution reach to move product across a wider surface area. What the spreadsheet did not capture was what Bayliner's discipline actually required to sustain. Edson's model worked because every decision, materials, options, pricing, dealer terms, was subordinated to a single constraint: keep the boat affordable without making it embarrassing. That constraint required constant vigilance. It meant resisting the temptation to cut costs past a functional threshold. It meant understanding that the buyer Bayliner served had no tolerance buffer. If the product disappointed, they did not complain to a dealer and upgrade. They left the category entirely and told everyone they knew. Brunswick inherited the volume. It did not fully inherit the constraint. Through the early 1990s, the signs were subtle. Material substitutions here. Simplified assembly processes there. The kinds of decisions that look rational in a quarterly review and corrosive only across a multi-year horizon. Fiberglass layup schedules thinned, hardware quality softened, interior fit and finish began to drift below the floor Edson had held. The 1990 recession hit the recreational marine market hard, which provided cover. When sales dropped industry-wide, internal cost pressures that might have drawn scrutiny in a growth environment passed without serious challenge. At the dealer level, the feedback was arriving. Warranty claims were climbing. Buyers who had purchased on the Bayliner promise were finding boats that did not quite deliver it. Gel coat that faded prematurely. Hardware that corroded faster than expected. Hulls that developed stress cracks inside the warranty window. Nothing catastrophic in any single unit. Corrosive in aggregate. The brand's central promise had always been simple. You do not need to be wealthy to be on the water. What went unspoken in that promise was the other half, and what you buy will not humiliate you when you get there. By the mid-1990s, that second half was beginning to fray. The volume remained, the standard did not. By the late 1990s, Bayliner had a reputation problem, not a rumor. A documented, dealer-confirmed marina spread reputation problem. The boats that had made Bayliner dominant through the 1970s and 1980s had been honest products. They were not the finest boats on the water. They were never meant to be. But they floated reliably, ran dependably, and did not embarrass their owners at the ramp. That was the deal. By the mid to late 1990s, enough boats were coming off Bayliner lots with quality deficiencies serious enough to break the deal openly. Dealers absorbed the first wave. Warranty repairs, customer service hours, goodwill replacements. The costs were real but manageable in isolation. What was not manageable was the compounding effect on showroom traffic. A buyer who has a bad experience does not return. More damaging, in the tightly social world of recreational boating, they talk. Boat ramps are not anonymous. Marina slips are not private. The informal information network of the boating community is fast, specific, and long-memoried. Bayliner's used boat values began to reflect the shift. Resale prices softened. Then they dropped. A buyer considering a $25,000 Bayliner who could see what a 3-year-old Bayliner was trading for on the secondary market was receiving a clear signal, and many of them were reading it correctly. Inside Brunswick, the response tracked the logic of a portfolio company managing an underperforming asset. Cost reduction continued. The model range was rationalized. Fewer SKUs, simpler configurations, less investment in tooling refresh. Every dollar saved on a mold update was a dollar not spent maintaining the product standard that justified the volume. Competitors had been watching with focused attention. Chaparral, Tracker, Four Winds, and others were operating in overlapping price territory with fresher tooling, stronger quality discipline, and dealer networks hungry for a credible alternative. They did not need to beat Bayliner on price. They needed only to be clearly better on reliability at a comparable price point. And by the early 2000s, that bar was not difficult to clear. The product got cheaper. The excuses got louder. Brunswick attempted repositioning efforts through the early 2000s. New model designs were introduced. Marketing language shifted toward value and quality messaging. But repositioning a brand whose reputation has been structurally damaged requires sustained investment and time. Two things a conglomerate managing quarterly targets is structurally reluctant to provide. The 2008 financial crisis delivered the blow that the quality erosion had been setting up for a decade. Recreational boating is a discretionary category, and discretionary spending collapsed faster in 2008 and 2009 than almost any other consumer sector. Bayliner, entering the crisis with a compromised reputation, a weakened dealer network, and a customer base that had been quietly defecting for years, had no resilience buffer to absorb it. Brunswick shuttered Bayliner's primary manufacturing operations. Plants that had once run continuously, producing tens of thousands of hulls per year, went quiet. Workers who had built boats on those lines for decades collected their last paychecks, and Brunswick did not kill the Bayliner trademark. Trademarks are assets, and even a damaged asset has residual value on a balance sheet. After the manufacturing shutdowns of the post-2008 period, Brunswick eventually restarted limited Bayliner production. Smaller boats, tighter range, offshore manufacturing arrangements that bore almost no resemblance to the vertically integrated Seattle area operation Orrin Edson had built. The boats that carry the Bayliner name today are real products. They are not the inheritors of anything Edson would have recognized as his machine. The manufacturing footprint that once produced more than 50,000 hulls annually is gone. The tooling, the molds, the skilled assembly workforce, dispersed, retired, or absorbed into other industries. The dealer network that Edson built across decades contracted severely. Many of the dealers who had sold Bayliner for 20 or 30 years quietly switched flags to competitors who had spent the 1990s doing what Bayliner had stopped doing, maintaining the standard. On the water, the legacy is complicated. There are tens of thousands of Bayliner boats still in use across North American lakes and bays. Older hulls from the 1970s and early 1980s that were built when the manufacturing discipline was intact, and that have proven, with maintenance, genuinely durable. These boats are Edson's actual legacy. The boats built in the years when Brunswick was optimizing margins tell a different story, and their owners know it. The business lesson here is not complicated, but it is one that conglomerates keep refusing to learn. A mass-market brand that succeeds on value is not a low-quality brand. It is a precision operation, one that has found the exact threshold between affordable and acceptable, and holds that line with discipline. That threshold is not self-maintaining. It requires active, product-focused management that understands what the customer is actually buying. When Bayliner's customer paid for a boat, they were not buying fiberglass and hardware. They were buying entry to a life they had been told was not for people like them. Betray that purchase with a product that embarrasses them at the ramp, and you have not just lost a customer. You have confirmed the original suspicion that it was never really for them. Brunswick replaced product judgment with financial judgment. The two are not the same, and in a brand built entirely on a customer promise, the difference is eventually total. Orrin Edson sold his company to a buyer who understood its scale and misunderstood its soul. They sold the factory and kept the name. Then they nearly lost both. The largest recreational boat company in the world was built by a salesman who understood one thing about middle-class America that nobody else wanted to act on. It was dismantled by a conglomerate that understood everything about the asset and nothing about the agreement.